Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, all you porcupines, you. This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the New Hampshire Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Thank you for joining us this evening. Of course, every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m., we bring you a brand spanking new episode of the Porcupine Report featuring free-range conversations with interesting people and news from the Free State. This is episode 65. Thank you so much for joining us. Wherever you are enjoying this show, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or X or Spotify or any of your favorite podcasting apps, please go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, share, whatever makes sense for whatever platform you're enjoying the show. Please help us extend the reach new audiences. Of course, if you support the Free State movement, then we need to reach more people in the Liberty diaspora so they know what's being built here in the Free State, the libertarian homeland. Boy, right now we're looking forward to and we're building up for the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which is less than, well, it's as of recording this, it's 22 days away. We're recording this a little bit early this week, though, because I'm going to be traveling. I'm flying off Monday morning to California for some meetings. I'm going to be in one of the least free states in America the next couple of days, but I look forward to being back. But PorcFest it's coming up pretty quick, less than 3 weeks away. So if you don't have your tickets yet, you're going to want to go to PorcFest.com. That's pork with a C, not a K, because it's a freedom festival, not a barbecue festival. But our theme this year is Taste the Revolution. We're bringing back the one pot cook-off, and there's going to be a lot of great food as well as a lot of great people and a lot of great liberties. So be sure to get your tickets. And as a special thank you to you, a member of our Porcupine Report audience, please use my discount code Granite Gulch and you'll get 10% off your tickets. And always remember that we are doing so much family programming at PorcFest with our Porcupines programming. Connor Boyack, the author of the Tuttle Twins, will be there. He'll be personally reading one of his books to the kids. We're going to have a professional puppeteer. We're going to have a petting zoo, and I'll be doing a mock legislature with a lot of the older kids and teens. So we're training them to take over their state legislatures and advance freedom as they get older. But anyway, it's worth remembering that children's tickets are incredibly discounted. So bring the whole family. This is a family-friendly freedom festival. All right. Looking forward to seeing you there in less than 3 weeks. Some news before we get to our conversation today. It does seem like, spring is here in the Free State and love is in the air. At least that's the only reason why I can imagine that these progressives keep publishing all these love letters about the Free State Project in local papers across New Hampshire. Just the other week, I received a notice from one of our Porcupine patrons of a letter that he read in a local Wolfboro paper. The author, a woman named Denise, she thinks that the Free State Project has not received the, quote, attention it deserves. And I want to share some of the very kind things she wrote about us in this letter. She wrote, quote, "The Free State movement continues to recruit people from all over the country to move to New Hampshire in order to create a stronghold for libertarian ideas, a free society with limited government, self-reliance, and free markets. They're also building their community and influencing state politics, disproportionately running for public offices. The Free State movement is the genesis for school choice and the right to work movements." Well, Denise, I really appreciate the very kind words there. And she goes on in her letter to actually list a lot of the policy reforms that Free Staters most active in the legislative process have been pursuing, including education freedom accounts, directing education dollars to students instead of systems, prohibiting DEI instruction in government schools, requiring firearm safety instruction in government schools, and passing protections on local property taxpayers against these runaway school budgets. But What is very interesting in this letter, though, despite her singing our accolades, she didn't actually intend this as a love letter. She intended it as a hate letter. In fact, in her subject line, she's warning all the progressives that they need to wake up to the Free Stater threat. Well, you know, as these progressives lose their grip on the institutions of politics and culture, I think we're seeing a lot more of this. In fact, Denise is not alone. I've seen just in the last couple of weeks so many articles from progressive state house reporters or just progressive activists decrying over and over the Free State Project, but writing letters that I feel like we could write ourselves. Look, here's one from a State House reporter who says that, who's not a fan of ours, but he notes that the Free Staters and mega libertarians have taken over the Republican Party in New Hampshire. That was an in-depth New Hampshire. You had a recent state legislators we noted on the show who said that the education freedom accounts are a plot to recruit libertarian families and destroy New Hampshire. I mean, that's a little hyperbolic, but certainly it is having an impact in bringing more libertarians to New Hampshire, people who love liberty and want the government off their backs. So I just want to say thank you to all of the progressives out there who keep writing these love letters about us. I know that love and hate are two sides of the same coin, and you may interpret it as hate, but I just interpret it as love. So keep sending those love letters and screaming to everyone in New Hampshire about the great work being done by those who are advancing freedom in the live free or die state. So, all right. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Let's get into our conversation for today's episode. We've got a great guest joining us today, someone who's been involved in the Free State movement for a very long time. Maybe he'll tell us how long. I know he's been at this in New Hampshire for many years preceding my move to New Hampshire. In fact, he ran several cycles ago as the Libertarian Party candidate for the U.S. Senate against the current governor, then U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte. And the percentage that he got in that election was enough to cover the spread. And I think it kind of sent a message to Republicans in the state of New Hampshire that if you want to win these important races, you can't ignore the libertarians. We are a force to be reckoned with. And you got to come to the table with us and care about our priorities. And it's been interesting to see those lessons be internalized to some degree over the last couple of years. I think this individual had something to do with that. He's also very involved in the effort to free Roger Ver, one of the political prisoners being held by our federal government for the crime of cryptocurrency. He's been a crusader against central bank digital currencies, trying to make sure that in the digital revolution, the digital currency revolution, that is the people that are ultimately empowered by this, not central banks. And his organization, the Daylight Freedom Foundation, is going to be one of our top sponsors for PorcFest this year. They're going to be operating one of the two tents right down on the main field, right by the main pavilion. If you've ever been to PorcFest, you know exactly where that is. His name is Aaron Day, and I want to welcome him to the Porcupine Report.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. I guess before we get into PorcFest and all the plans that you're putting together for your tent there, could you introduce yourself a little bit more? Tell folks about your journey, both with kind of the Free State movement, but also you're very involved and big in the cryptocurrency world these days. Tell folks a little bit about your background.
Sure. I mean, a lot of people that get involved with the Free State Project or involved with, libertarianism are there because they were radicalized by something. And so I like to say that I've been radicalized on 3 different occasions. I was first radicalized. I dropped out of Duke, started my first company in 1995. And, throughout this process, ended up spending a lot of time meeting with people on Wall Street and met with over 150 venture capitalists. And I learned through that process that we really don't have free market capitalism. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but it's really more venture socialism and everything else. So that kind of changed my perspective, because prior to that, I'm the guy who in high school started an Ayn Rand objectivist club. So I've been kind of pro-liberty, actually, probably since I was 14, 15 years old. But that was really interesting for me to learn about the fact that, we really don't have free markets. Then I started a healthcare company in 2004, which was very successful, and it was using financial incentives to reward people for improving their health. And we had clients in 43 states. We were profitable, growing, and we were targeting corporations, helping corporations help their employees improve their health. And that company was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Attorney General Eric Holder. But I wasn't specifically targeted. None of those entities or none of the people working on any of that legislation knew who I was or knew what my company was all about. We were just collateral damage for very bad legislation. So Obamacare basically said you cannot reward people for actual measured results. So they basically said you only reward people for participation. So they participation trophied healthcare. And Dodd-Frank made it so that the financial incentives that we were providing to participants in our program could no longer receive debit cards. We were using Citigroup, and because of Dodd-Frank, Citigroup had to exit that. And then we're using somebody that offered a check writing service, and they basically would write checks for a whole bunch of different companies. They'd been in business for 30 years. Well, allegedly one or two of their clients was involved in offshore gaming. So Attorney General Eric Holder came in and seized everybody's accounts. And so we had hundreds of thousands of dollars of rewards that were going out, mostly to nurses across the United States. And we were told that we were guilty until proving innocent. So we bounced hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of checks, had to spend 6 months in legal fees to prove that we weren't one of these other clients. And so at that point, that radicalized me again. But it also taught me that, at least at that point, I thought government was just incompetent. And so then I went on I left the entrepreneur side, moved to New Hampshire in 2009 as part of the Free State Project. I learned about it. I read about Jason Sorens, read about it online. But then I was listening to Free Talk Live. So I'd go to the gym. I was actually in Boston at the time. I'm from Indiana originally, but one of my startups was based in Boston. And so I was listening to Free Talk Live. I actually talked to Mark Edge a couple times before deciding to make the move, and then got really involved in 2012. So we had twins in 2010. So that was taking a lot of my time, and then some other things personally. And then I got engaged with political activism in a big way in 2012. And spent a lot of time on politics. I was the chair of the Republican Liberty Caucus, started a super PAC. I was actually the chair of the Free State Project for a couple of years. And as you mentioned, I do want to change one thing. When I ran against Kelly Ayotte, it was as an independent. There was also a libertarian on the ballot, but the libertarian was a little bit more left-leaning. And it's a really long story. Some people know it, some people don't understand it, but I was basically trying to stop Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire. And most of the Republicans in the state were against Medicaid expansion, but Medicaid expansion was pushed from the top down by John H. Sununu and people in the state Senate, specifically to try to protect Kelly Ayotte's position in the U.S. Senate. And so my viewpoint on this is, and I gave people a year's advance notice. It wasn't my desire to want to do this, but I'm like, if you're going to destroy New Hampshire, if you're going to push an entitlement that further tethers the state of New Hampshire to the federal government just to protect one person, then I'm going to make sure that, we remove that incentive. And I'm not going to run in a primary because the primaries are rigged, and, you can't raise adequate money for that. And so I did run specifically to do this, but after talking to the chair of the party, I gave everybody a whole bunch, and for whatever reason, they didn't believe I'd actually do it, which if you saw any of my political activism before that, you should have expected that I would do that. But in any event, that got me into a lot of trouble. I ended up spending 5.5 years and $280 million worth of litigation, which I think is kind of tied to that. I think it was kind of lawfare related to that. And I won't go into the details about that, but I basically exited political activism for a while. In fact, a lot of people thought I left New Hampshire, which I didn't. I went down to Florida for a few months, but I've been living in New Hampshire continuously the entire time. And I kind of exited politics. I've actually since taken the view that, I don't ask for permission or forgiveness. We need to just start taking control of our own lives and working outside of the system. When I started to see free staters like Jeremy Kauffman and Ian Freeman were being targeted by the federal government, I started to look into this. Why specifically are people at the intersection of liberty and crypto being targeted. And what I found was there's a very specific reason that Venn diagram was put together. And that is that on March the 9th, 2022, Joe Biden signed Executive Order 14067. And what that executive order did is it authorized two things. It authorized the United States to officially pursue a central bank digital currency. And it also authorized a whole of government approach to cracking down on crypto. And so these things are related. So you need to go after people like Ian Freeman and Jeremy Kauffman, and then subsequent to that, people like Roger Ver, because they're the most effective people at promoting the use of these technologies outside of state control. So if you want to push a CBDC, no one will want a CBDC. The only way they'll take a CBDC is if it's in an emergency and there are no other alternatives. And so they weaponize lawfare to eliminate the alternatives. And so I view this actually as probably the biggest single threat to human freedom globally, which is once your money can be programmed, tracked, and censored at a granular level, that's the gateway to social credit systems, vaccine passports, and everything else. It's really, to me, the end of free will. So I got out of I got back into kind of activism. I wrote a book called The Final Countdown. I actually ran for president as a Republican, actually with the idea being, well, hey, I got 17,000 votes statewide in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is the most important state for political primaries. Maybe I can use these two things together to elevate the importance of the CBDC issue within the Republican Party. I certainly wasn't running to win or even to cost anybody the election. I was using it to raise awareness on this issue, and it had some success. I will say this: Vivek Ramaswamy read my book. So Bruce Fenton had an event at his house, and I met with Vivek, gave him my book, and was really shocked because I met with him 3 other times, and he actually read the book. We've actually had some conversations about it. And if you'll recall, during the election, Trump came out against CBDCs the day before the New Hampshire primary, because at that point you actually still had Nikki Haley in contention. And so Trump needed some messaging, and he needed a way to appeal to, frankly, our audience, because many in the Free State Project, including Bruce Fenton and many others, have been very outspoken against CBDCs. And so as much as I thought that might be a good thing, it turns out it's not. And this is, something we'll be talking about at PorcFest. While Trump has come out against CBDCs, we now actually face probably a bigger threat, which is what you're seeing in the United States Congress is in the Senate, there's a bill called the Genius Act, and in the House, something called the Stable Act. And essentially what they're pushing is, and they're really excited about, stablecoins. And the problem with this is a stablecoin is kind of indistinguishable from a central bank digital currency, and that the real threat isn't whether Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve is issuing digital program tokens that can be programmed, tracked, and censored. It's equally problematic if it's Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chase. And so when you really dig through, and I wrote an article for the Brownstone Institute where I outlined a full analysis of the legislation. And the whole point of the legislation is to regulate stablecoins so that only large financial institutions will be able to comply. So in the end, what's going to happen is things like Tether and USDC, which are the 2 largest stablecoins in existence right now, are going to end up being owned by the largest financial institutions. And so basically, you're going to have the same digital tyranny and all of the tracking. It's just happening a different way, and oddly, in a more accelerated way. So now that the US is pushing stablecoins, other countries are accelerating their CBDCs. The EU has announced that they may launch a CBDC as soon as October of this year. So in an unfortunate twist, we actually are seeing an acceleration of programmable digital money across the globe as a result of the election. But most people are complacent because they take this viewpoint of, well, Trump said he signed an executive order banning these things, but we're going to end up actually in the same place, but much faster, and people aren't paying any attention to it. So that's been a bit frustrating, because it's actually now more difficult for me to get this message out, because now most people don't understand the Federal Reserve. Now I've got to go and explain, 3 or 4 other things, which makes it more difficult to message. But the threat is worse now than it was a year ago.
So if you could paint the picture a little bit, what particular mischief under a CBDC regime or or under the kind of stablecoin regime that you're seeing the potential for here. How does that tangibly affect a person's life?
Sure. Well, one thing I want to say is that and I wrote another Brownstone article about this. I would argue we already have a CBDC. So we're in one of these situations where everybody's sitting here worried about a future where there's censorship and tracking and all of these other things. And we really already have that. We're already like 90% of the way there. And I'll explain. Money's created when basically the government goes to the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and issues an IOU. And what happens when they issue the IOU to the Federal Reserve is the Federal Reserve creates the money out of thin air in an Oracle database. So, I mean, strictly by a definition, that is a central bank digital currency. So when the government is writing checks, those checks are coming out of an account at the Federal Reserve in an Oracle database. Commercial banks also have their own databases. These are Oracle databases and Microsoft databases, and they print money out of thin air backed by, there's more detail to this, but I'm not going to go into it, backed by the reserves in the digital account at the Federal Reserve. So Citibank's printing money out of thin air backed by the reserves they have in the Oracle database. And all of these databases are programmable, Oracle databases and everything else. And so, for instance, a lot of people talk about they're excited that RFK Jr. is going to, stop the use of food stamps to buy sugary drinks and sodas and everything like that. Yay, they're cheering that on. Well, actually, that just shows that we already have digital programmable money, because EBT cards are actually digital programmable money using our existing banking infrastructure. So now they're just changing merchant codes and category codes for products and making it so that people can't use these cards for those purposes. So basically what I'm saying is our money is already programmable. This is true as well with health savings accounts and flexible spending accounts for healthcare, which are these cards that you can put in some pre-tax dollars for healthcare expenses. But the healthcare expenses are only healthcare expenses that are in a database that have been pre-approved. So that's digital programmable money. So and as to censorability, I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this right now, myself included, have been debanked at some point. And so this has been going on, and it's not even just pro-liberty people. It's people in the health freedom space, certainly people in the food freedom space, gun area, whether you're a gun retailer or any part of the supply chain with respect to guns. This has been going on for a long time, and now it's gained popular attention because Melania Trump, Barron Trump, Kanye West, Dr. Joseph Mercola, and others, not just our immediate, group, have been canceled, and now they're actually starting to talk about it publicly. So again, all of that happens today with the existing system. Some of that is from the Federal Reserve, but most of it isn't from the Federal Reserve. I outlined that there are 13 different ways in which the United States Congress and the federal government are already tracking our financial transactions. And when you go through and look at this, we have the Bank Secrecy Act, we have the Patriot Act, we have NSA bulk data collection. There was something that happened about a month ago where the Treasury Department said, so right now, if you do a financial transaction greater than, say, I think it's either $5,000 or $10,000, that automatically generates a report that goes to the Treasury Department. Well, the Treasury Department decided, based on something related to immigration, that they wanted to change the criteria for 30 zip codes, where there was automatic reporting on any transactions greater than $200. So what this shows is that, again, with an edict coming from the Treasury Department, now all of a sudden the Treasury Department is automatically fed in real time transaction information about people in various, in this case, geographies, but they could slice and dice it however they wanted. That happens today. So I kind of laugh about this because I talked to Ted Cruz and some of these other people that will say, well, we need to stop central bank digital currencies. We don't want financial surveillance of our citizens. All of the financial surveillance that's happening is happening because of legislation that came out of the US Congress. The Federal Reserve doesn't have its own incentive necessarily to be tracking people. So the Bank Secrecy Act and everything else, anti-money laundering laws, know your customer laws, all of this information that's collected about us when we set up either a banking account or an account at a cryptocurrency exchange, all of that is care of the United States Congress, not the central bank. And in some cases, for instance, the canceling of people like, Kanye West and Melania Trump and others, that wasn't directed by the Federal Reserve, nor was it directed by Congress. those were decisions made by woke policies of the commercial banks themselves. So the viewpoint that I have on this is we need to separate money and state. The problem isn't just the central banks. The problem is the central banks, it's the government and the commercial banks, which largely own the Federal Reserve. And so all of it is problematic. Fiat currency has a 0% success rate. The average fiat currency only lasts 27 years. And there are 7 main reasons that a fiat currency will fail. The US is blinking bright red on all 7. So if fiat currencies never worked, and there have been thousands of implementations, why are we keeping on trying this same failed model? And so, the appeal of Bitcoin early on was that here was an opportunity to have censorship-resistant money that was completely separate from authoritarian governments and central banks. That kind of lost its way. But I'm hoping that at PorcFest this year, we at least bring back some of the PorcFest energy from 2012 and 2013, when people like Roger Ver were introducing people to Bitcoin for the first time. But now, instead of Bitcoin, we're focusing more on privacy coins that can't be tracked or censored by the government.
I will say, I remember listening into the Bitcoin conference last year and Edward Snowden speaking. And the one line I remember, well, one of the few lines I remember taking away from that is him raising the concern about with Bitcoin, that the lack of privacy there, and that this is a of course he's the privacy guy. He's been advocating for our privacy rights for a long time. So it certainly is I suppose something to be conscious of when we look at you mentioned Roger Ver, and of course he's currently being, you could say prosecuted. I'd say persecuted by the federal government. Could you tell folks a little bit more about his case and why you feel so passionate about joining the effort to get the government off his back?
Yeah. So, 2.5 years ago or whatever, when I dropped everything that I was doing and got back into whatever you want to call what I do right now, activism, wrote a book, ran for president and everything else. The whole reason that I did it, I remember I was actually on Free Talk Live with Ian prior to his sentencing hearing. And he actually read my bank run manifesto. And we talked about this because he wasn't even fully aware of exactly the extent to which this Biden executive order was in place. So my intention was to warn people about this before it was too late. And so in addition, once I stopped running for president, I've been going around the country. My wife and I visited 26 states, and I've gone everywhere else doing CBDC workshops and onboarding people to crypto. But I was warning people about the lawfare part of this executive order. Roger had written a book called Hijacking Bitcoin, which was published April 12th, I believe. Or no, I interviewed it. It came out early April. I interviewed him on April the 12th. And he was arrested in Spain on April the 28th. So he's coming up on almost 400 days where he's been stuck. The reason I've been so passionate about Roger's case is, and the reason Roger was arrested in Spain, which by the way is kind of a form of torture because his friend John McAfee was also arrested in Spain and literally died in the very same prison that Roger was placed in initially. But Roger is the most successful person, I would argue, on the planet at introducing people to the use of cryptocurrency for the purpose of being peer-to-peer digital cash that you use as a replacement for central bank currencies. And when I say this, and for those who may not be familiar with Roger learned about Bitcoin in 2010. And he learned about it watching Free Talk Live. He learned about it from Ian Freeman and Mark Edge. And when he heard about it, he did research. And I think he spent 3 days straight studying it, to the point where he was sick. He got so sick because he couldn't sleep. He actually had to be hospitalized. But he just fell in love with it. And so he actually was the first retailer to accept Bitcoin for his company, Memory Dealers. And then he would actually take out ads on Free Talk Live, just promoting Bitcoin, just promoting that people use it. No direct, just because he thought this was such a great idea. So it turns out he was the first ever investor in the entire Bitcoin ecosystem. He was years ahead of the venture capital community, and he was a decade ahead of Wall Street. So if you were starting a company, an exchange, or a wallet, or any kind of innovative business, He was literally the first guy to invest in it and put his own money in and put his own time and his own support. And it wasn't just limited to Bitcoin. A lot of people don't know this. Roger was the first investor in XRP. A guy who's no longer actually at XRP, the founder of XRP, went to Roger first. It was one guy. They had no other employees. Roger was literally the first guy there. He was the first investor in countless privacy projects. So his singular focus the entire time, though, has been that we need to use these alternatives for day-to-day commerce around the world. And it needs to be not only censorship resistant, but it needs to have low fees. And I won't go into all the hijacking Bitcoin stuff because that could be a whole other talk, but he's been consistent about that for 15 years, more so than anyone on the planet. And he's just had an incredible impact. So when I saw what was going on, given that my focus area and everything that I'm spending my life on is trying to warn people about this, and then Roger gets arrested, just a couple of weeks after I interview him, I realized this is what this is all about. It's about stopping him and having a chilling effect on people learning about the fact that you can even use cryptocurrencies for day-to-day transactions, which, by the way, most people don't even know that. When I do these workshops across the country, most people don't know that people used to use Bitcoin to buy things. They would go to overstock.com. They would go to Newegg, Microsoft, Expedia. There were countless websites that were taking Bitcoin directly because the fees were low and everything else. This was starting to be a replacement. This new narrative of it's digital gold and you never spend it and you're only supposed to hold it. That's not what was in the white paper. That was not what it was supposed to be. And I could talk at length about the fact that that was actually deliberate because the same people that made the changes to Bitcoin and turned Bitcoin into digital gold instead of digital cash also funded all 3 US CBDC pilots. So on the one hand, you have a whole bunch of people thinking this is freedom money and it's digital gold. And behind the scenes, they're building a central bank digital currency that can do 1.8 million transactions per second. It's a horrifying story. And it's very contentious. It's even contentious within our community. But Roger is the single, not only the most impactful, but the lawfare against him is more egregious than any of the lawfare. He is facing 109 years, which is essentially a life sentence in prison. And they're saying it's for tax fraud. But when you go through and you look at the case, what you find is that, first of all, the DOJ lied to the grand jury to begin with. And they concealed information between Roger and his lawyers and accountants showing that he was trying to comply, in fact, be conservative with the tax policies, which were, by the way, kind of unknown at the time in 2014. In 2014, the IRS didn't have clear guidelines. It wasn't clear if it was an asset or if it was a currency or what was it. And so Roger went above and beyond to try to comply. That was withheld. They sent armed IRS agents to his lawyer's office, violated his attorney-client privilege, which, by the way, is something whether you like Roger or not, or whether you like crypto or not, this sets a precedent that basically you can no longer rely on attorney-client privilege. You also can't rely on counsel anymore either. If he's relying on these professionals, and this is how he ended up making the estimation of his taxes, and then they can come after you retroactively 10 years later and say, well, you didn't pay enough. We're not going to tell you how much it was. We're going to lie to the grand jury about whether or not you even tried to pay the right amount. And then we're going to send armed IRS agents to your lawyers. That's a pretty bad situation. And the precedents set there affect people in all industries of all size, individuals or businesses. And so that's why, to me, it's been so important. Now, I haven't been just focusing on Roger. I've also been focusing on Ian Freeman, Roman Storm, others. And the Trump administration's been good within the SEC at getting rid of some of these cases. The real challenge point right now is with the DOJ. And I'm trying to be patient. Patience isn't necessarily always one of my strong suits, but in this case, it's getting kind of long, and the DOJ has a lot on their plate. But the people that are facing the largest criminal penalties, those cases have not been dealt with at all. Those people are still languishing, and that's really unfortunate. But I'm not blaming the administration. In fact, my goal is to do whatever I can to just make sure that it gets to the top of the pile, because the Trump administration is saying that the U.S. is going to lead in Bitcoin, the U.S. is going to lead in crypto, and also promoting this idea of these golden visas, where we're trying to get the best and brightest and smartest people from around the world to move to the United States. Well, you can't do any of those things if you are crucifying Bitcoin Jesus and kind of finishing Biden's lawfare job, that doesn't really set the right tone. And by the way, without Roger, I don't think any of this would be where it is today. Bitcoin would not be where it is, and the entire crypto ecosystem wouldn't be where it is.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, you know, one thing that has been disappointing for me to see, I mean, you know, beyond certainly what the federal government is doing is to see the way that I think some of the rivalries and tribalism within the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin debates, even, you know, I see some, you know, and I don't know enough to take any side in the crypto versus Bitcoin block size, you know, arguments going on. But when I see some people who are on the Bitcoin maxi side who say, you know, good, Roger Ver should rot in a jail because he doesn't support, you know, their vision for you know, Bitcoin maximalist perspective anymore. It just seems to me like so short-sighted. We should remember that, and same thing with Ian Freeman. I know that some people have had past beefs with Ian Freeman in the past, but whatever happened in the past, the federal government is not going after these people for whatever grudges people might have. They're going after them for the exercise of monetary freedom. And we should remember, right, that old saying of like me against my brother and I against my cousin, my brother, my cousin and I against the world, right? If someone's a Bitcoin maxi and someone's more in alternative cryptocurrencies or privacy coins or things like that, if the federal government is coming after one of us, they're coming after all of us, and we should be standing together against them.
What we should be, and actually, I mentioned the two things that radicalized me. You know, my first startup, and then the kind of government crushing my company. The third radicalization that happened to me was actually going to Ian Freeman's sentencing hearing. I don't know. I guess I didn't think I would be that profoundly affected by it. But his case, yeah, I understand people don't like certain things about Ian, but this case, it doesn't matter. And in this particular case, it is very clear that it was a case of entrapment. He was targeted, as I said, as was Jeremy Kaufman. There are a lot of, you know, if you go through the criteria of companies that were clearly violating the law versus those that weren't, Jeremy Kaufman and Ian Freeman should not have even been on a top 1,000 list anywhere, but they were actually aggressively targeted. I think there were 5 departments of the federal government involved in the raid on Ian Freeman. And that really, I was just watching Ian, you know, get taken away, and that whole thing. I mean, he's now in federal prison for 8 years. And when you look at the case and you look at the way that the DOJ even presented the case, where they manipulated the evidence and everything else, like, it's just, they're not in this for the truth. They're in this for a politically motivated agenda. And that really jarred me. And then, so then when what happened to Roger happened, I'm like, okay, I couldn't not do anything I'm still doing everything that I can. I don't know how helpful it is, but to try to raise awareness on Roger's case. And, you know, and my hope was, for people that are new to the Free State Project, I will tell you this. I learned about Bitcoin. I'd heard about it before, but I didn't focus on it until I believe it was the 2012 Liberty Forum. Roger was there with Charlie Shrem and Eric Voorhees and some others. And Roger gave this really passionate speech about how Bitcoin was a way to defeat the central banks and stop the wars and the tyranny all over the world. And it was charged, that environment. And so many people that are now OGs in crypto learned about Bitcoin from that very talk at that event. I mean, the Free State Project has been way, way, way ahead on crypto. And one of the things that I love about PorcFest is it's not just, I mean, there are a lot of great talks, but I mean, there are people using alternative currencies the entire week of the event. And there's Agora Alley and everything else. Well, Roger came to PorcFest in 2012, and I was recirculating a video clip about this, and he had physical Bitcoin, and he was actually selling these physical Bitcoin for $7 to $11 each at PorcFest in 2012. There are a lot of people that are very wealthy because of Roger, but the energy level in 2012, 2013 at PorcFest and Liberty Forum around crypto, the whole energy was about, yeah, man, we're going to stop the Federal Reserve. We're going to stop these wars. I mean, it had very much a Ron Paul vibe. I actually have a shirt now that I wear that says the revolution will be tokenized using privacy tokens. And this has been lost, right? I mean, I'm glad now that PorcFest is taking crypto again. I think PorcFest was taking crypto and the Free State Project was taking crypto as far back as 2012. And then it didn't for a while because it was too expensive, too slow, and everything else. And now,
and government made it more difficult too. we managed to figure it out, but yeah, government
managed to figure it out.
Make it easy.
And we did I paid, I think, with Monero for our sponsorship, and so I want to try to bring back that Roger energy, that Roger electricity, because it's been kind of a little bit flat or whatever. But by the way, when Roger and Ian and others were talking about Bitcoin originally, it's like, yeah, this is cool. This would be a nice thing to have. This is now absolutely necessary because central banks and governments around the world are implementing the tyranny side of this technology. We don't have a choice but to be successful at this. If we don't actually get broad-based adoption on this, then, as I said at the very beginning, we're going to look at a complete digital surveillance state. So the stakes are higher, and there's more of an emergency. And I will say I've been traveling around the world, crypto conferences, Liberty conferences all over, and there's not that sense of urgency. And I'm hoping we can bring that back. So our tent is going to be focused on a lot of talks, not on a variety of different privacy coins, on privacy technology, a lot of hands-on talks. We're doing this in conjunction with Monerotopia. And in fact, we're going to be live streaming MoneroCon, which is the big Monero event that unfortunately is happening the same time as PorcFest. But I believe on Friday and Saturday mornings, we're going to be live streaming from Prague, the MoneroCon events. So the top developers there, Luke Parker and others, you're going to be able to come to our tent and watch those. Sal the Agorist is going to be there. Joel Valenzuela. We're actually bringing back the OGs, and it is my hope that Roger might be there. Probably not in person, but maybe virtually for a talk. Because my whole theme and the whole reason I got excited about this is let's bring back the Roger crypto energy, and then if possible, let's bring back Roger himself. And because I know how much that changed people's lives and changed the entire trajectory of cryptocurrency around the world. And I think we can do it again. And I think there is no better event in the entire world than PorcFest for this. And it's not even close. I've been to conferences everywhere. I know you've been to conferences everywhere. I mean, I'm going to Freedom Fest or whatever, but this is the event. And I, if you're watching this, when I think 2012 was my first PorcFest. I mean, PorcFest has changed. I mean, it was like 25 people for the first one or whatever. And it's a whole new different format, right? Now people have families, but there's something literally for everyone here. And I think it is, if not the biggest, one of the biggest Liberty events, but it isn't, again, it's not just talk. It's actually living Liberty and then learning about the Free State Project. So I'm super excited about this year. And I encourage anyone, if you've been there before, maybe you didn't have a good experience one year, understand that this is an evolving event, and I really strongly encourage everyone, whether you've been in the past or not, to attend this year.
Something that I remember from PorcFest last year. I was talking with Jeffrey Tucker, who with the Brownstone Institute, and of course they've had the tent spot that you are that you are operating this year. And Jeffrey Tucker said to me, what he loved about PorcFest was you go to all these libertarian conferences and these different groups and all that, and there can be in the libertarian broader world like certain like ivory towerism, like we're living in the realm of ideas but not actually being really connected to what's actually happening in the real world on the ground. And I know he commented, and I thought this was very astute, is that at PorcFest is like a real gathering of a lot of real like working class, like people who love liberty but are connected to the actual real world. And so there's a certain maybe a certain more urgency or sense of reality of the stakes of what are here versus like, Jeffrey Tucker always talks about, right, the COVID era with the laptop class libertarians who, this is terrible. But I'm going to get my Uber Eats, and it's just kind of an ideological exercise, rather than actually understanding what's at stake in a visceral sense.
Well, these Liberty events have become a joke, and I think I just saw I think something from Jeffrey or someone else that showed that in 2020 the Cato Institute took $150,000 from Soros. And the whole genesis of the Brownstone Institute came out of COVID when, as you said, a lot of these groups, Students for Liberty, Cato, all the Beltway groups were literally wrong lockdowns, and they jumped right in on, we're going to sacrifice liberty for security, like right away. I mean, they became leaders in it.
Yeah.
And so Brownstone was started out of that to be a voice for actually, continuing to speak the truth and stand on principle. I can't say enough good things about Jeffrey and, the courage that it took to actually start that. Like, people have no idea how much. There's a lot of targeting of when you do these kinds of things, the Great Barrington Declaration and everything else. And so it's phenomenal what he's put together there. And yeah, so again, this is a hands-on event. Yes, there are great talks, but it is practical advice, and and hopefully people will decide to move as well. And I don't know what the breakdown is of people that are already here versus new people, but this is it. I mean, if you want liberty in your lifetime, there is no second best option to the Free State Project, and this event will give you a broad showcase of what all that entails.
Well, Aaron, we're really looking forward to having you there. Any final things you'd like to share with folks about what they might find when they come to your tent, or any final words you want to share?
Well, the intent and we're still developing the program. So if you actually want to participate on panels, we want it to be. It's certainly not going to be stuffy. There's going to be a lot of interactivity, a lot of actual use. There are people coming in from Zano, which is a privacy coin that Roger actually introduced me to. That I'm more excited about this than when I originally even learned about Bitcoin, in terms of it being an anti-tyranny technology and a solution not only for CBDCs, but they're not just going to tokenize money. They're going to tokenize all of our assets. This is how we end up owning nothing. And Zano allows you to privately tokenize things, tokenize assets, stocks, bonds, whatever it is that you want. You could even use Zano to make Bitcoin Cash, and Ethereum private. So we're going to be talking a lot about Zano. We're going to be talking about confidential layer. There's a new marketplace called Zano Bay. There's actually something that's just been released called Freedom Dollar, which is the world's first privacy stablecoin. So a lot of people like to use Tether, USDC, but these are trackable in the same way and freezable in the very same way that Bitcoin is. And so this is the world's very first privacy stablecoin, and it's built on Zano. So we're going to be showing people how to use that. We're going to be doing a lot of, as I said, hands-on stuff. The other thing I just want to say, going back to Roger, I encourage everybody to go to freerogernow.org and sign the open letter. And it'll take you like 30 seconds. This matters. Ross Ulbricht was able to get 600,000 signatures. This was one of the things that contributed to this getting on the radar for Trump, and ultimately why he received a full pardon. So we want to get as much momentum. So please go to freerogernow.org. And then the last thing is there's and I hope this never happens. I hope he gets pardoned or it gets resolved beforehand. But actually, I'm going to have to leave PorcFest Sunday morning and head right to the airport to go to LA. There's a hearing in Los Angeles on 6/23 at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time in the LA federal court, which is on Roger's motion to dismiss. So we want to make sure to get as many people there as possible. I would buy refundable tickets because, again, these things change, and hopefully it'll be resolved before then, but we want to make sure to have a big showing for that. But, again, this is going to be exciting. And I know that the other big sponsor is also crypto oriented, and I know all of those guys and like all of those guys. So it's great that this really is going to be a kind of a renaissance, I believe, of hands-on crypto. And I'm really excited about kind of the energy to expect at PorcFest this year. Yeah,
it certainly does seem that even, there's plenty of crypto stuff going on in the official programming, but but as far as the hub programming goes, all the other events that folks are putting on, like yourself and our other diamond level sponsors that we just had on in the last episode, who are doing the Exit Lounge, there's going to be a lot of energy around what's happening in crypto. And I think, Aaron, about what you say, the stakes are pretty high. I remember, you talk about how kind of the whole Bitcoin movement, especially in New Hampshire, came out of that Ron Paul energy, challenging the Federal Reserve, challenging the central bank. And there was always kind of this push-pull, kind of how do we do this between like a political path and a non-political path. And the political path was, we're going to get Congress to pass a bill to audit the Federal Reserve, right? And hey, that passed the House once. It never got through the Senate. It's never happened. But then you have people who went along and they just built an entire parallel monetary system on this new technology that actually became a threat. It does seem to me that if there is a like you say, if there's a path through this woods, avoiding both the CBDC and these basic effectively CBDC stablecoins that you talk about, it's going to have to come through people innovating on the non-political path, because Congress is never going to relinquish power. So I hopefully, just like over a decade ago, the conversations that helped make that happen are going to happen at PorcFest.
I think it's the best shot that we've got. When I ran for president, I wore a T-shirt, the same T-shirt every day. It had a big heart on it, and it said, "Ditch the dollar, halt CBDCs, stop World War III, and the Fed." And because that's what happens if you stop using their money. We can try to fight it all we want, but one of the things that I've learned the hard way is, there's this statement that what you resist persists. And so by engaging, I haven't seen a lot of people turn out to be better people by engaging in the political process, but it's all about energy. And if you take your energy out of that system and don't fight it, but move it into something else, you only have so much energy, and your time and money are the two biggest components of your energy. And so it's taken me a long time to figure this out, and definitely the hard way with a lot of lessons. But I'm more excited now. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff going on, and people, a lot of frustration, but I am truly excited about what's going on with these crypto projects. And I actually think that the best times are ahead of us. And I think we're going to look back 10 years from now at this PorcFest as being hopefully the place that ignited a whole new set of enthusiasm and revolution around really adopting these technologies. Awesome.
So everyone watching, you need to be there. Aaron, thank you so much. Where can people follow you and find out more?
You can follow me on X, Twitter. I'm at Aaron R. Day, and then you can find me at daylightfreedom.org.
Awesome. Aaron, we'll see you at PorcFest in under 3 weeks.
Awesome. Look forward to it. See you then.
All right. See you then. All right, everyone, that's the show. Again, reminder, go get your tickets for PorcFest, porcfest.com. Tickets are still on sale. Use discount code Granite Gulch. Gift from me to you. You'll get 10% off. And as Aaron mentioned, go to freerogernow.com and sign the petition there to free Roger Ver. I've already signed it. If you haven't signed it, please do so. As Aaron has mentioned, 600,000 signatures for Ross Ulbricht is what helped build momentum and make a difference there. So every signature does add up and make a difference as we build momentum around getting freedom for all of these political prisoners. Of course, Roger's not the only one. We've talked about Ian, anyway, there's all of the political prisoners being held by our federal government for cryptocurrency crimes, in quotes for the audio version. Those were quote marks, fake crimes. They're dependent on us. So the simplest thing you can do is sign a petition. Please go and do it. freerogernow.com. All right, everyone, that's the show. I really appreciate you tuning in. I look forward to seeing you all at PorcFest in just a few weeks. Thank you again to our producer for the show, Renita, for making us all look so wonderful. And furthermore, my opinion is